Greetings, everyone. I am very excited to be back in conversation with my friend and colleague, Rob Comer. And I'm going to briefly introduce you, Rob, and then we're going to get into this amazing conversation about some of what you've been doing with the Star Codons, their connection to DNA, precession, procession. So before we dive in, let me just talk a little bit about your background. Robert James Comer is a cosmic architect of the mystical. He's an astrologer, artist, author with a multifaceted background spanning esoteric studies, scientific inquiry, the advanced chakra system, and artistic expression. His book, The Lost Octave, is about his discoveries about the ancient I Ching and astrology, and the work that you're doing, Rob, in continuing to download information that is guiding us, both in terms of reclaiming ancient wisdom, but integrating it now with scientific understanding and helping us, I think, to reconnect with our being multidimensional beings and how we can be moving into becoming the new humans we're meant to be. So the work that you're doing is so profound from my perspective in guiding us through this time of transition and transformation and helping us get a sense of what we're moving towards. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So great to be here again. And, it's so, like you said, so many things have been coming through and just continuing to flow through. And it's so great to, take off from our last conversation about my discoveries in the DNA because it really solidified itself through these last months into this now, online course that I'm doing. And this transmission just grew multidimensionally into so many factors. And I saw actually that you had a guest on that was speaking about the ninth dimension. And so the last conversation I had with you, I'd sort of started to see the code and how these things were flowing of the astrology and the DNA connection into the sort of sixth dimension. Well, since that point, funnily enough, I actually managed to figure out how to move that into the ninth dimension only about a week ago. So it's just interesting that sort of there's like a same consciousness thread about this, that many people are finding ways into how to express our multidimensional selves. But yeah, it's this, the Star Codons is the new sort of the part two of the Lost Octave. So the Lost Octave went into, sort of that missing pieces in sort of astrology to bring back the deacons and the star law and to bring in new information that was hidden within the I Ching. And then sort of part two is really this transmission of how all of this is woven into our DNA. And so now I've started to see that the DNA is actually like a direct mirror reflection of the stars. And so, how constellations are connected together, how certain deacons are connecting into the DNA, and what does that mean in the DNA, and finding correspondences to the star law. So it's like this complete sort of circle of, that we can look on under the microscope in advanced sort of scientific studies. And if you have that sort of view of understanding astrology, or if you're a polymath, or if you understand multiple disciplines of esoteric knowledge and things like this, then you can start to weave it all together. And this is what I'm so excited about and wanted to express to you today.
It's so exciting because it shows how it's all interconnected, it's all interwoven, and everything is mirroring everything else. So it's really supporting us in remembering that to come back into our wholeness and come back into being the multidimensional beings that we're capable of being.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what is a star codon is a really good question. So this is the sort of the transmission that I received about, a star, obviously the heavens, and a codon is what's in your genetics. So when you have, when you look at the genetic code, codons are sort of like groupings, and that's how they actually code the DNA. And so this is where we get this understanding of the non-coding, which is the what the quote the old what they used to call the junk DNA. Now it's called non-coding. But the stuff that they can actually code is created into these codons. And then they produce or connect to the amino acids, and then they create the proteins. And so this is the building blocks of all creation, of all life. And so this is how we can, trace back, like I said, through the maternal DNA in the last conversation we had. I've been tracing all the way back to first Eve, over 200, 300,000 years ago. And so, this is very much about using the DNA to trace our fractal lines through our ancestry. And by doing that, opening the doors to our ancestry. So whether that's for healing, whether that's for understanding, or whether that's just for sort of activating those sort of, you could say, dormant aspects within us, as we trace back our ancient past to the first birth of humanity. Mm. And so that's what I call the 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. So in the Star Codons, it's a whole year's course. I mean, there's just so much, as you can imagine, trying to basically unravel the whole human genome. So the first 40 days, 40 nights sort of analogy is the first 40 weeks, which is like the birthing period. And so we actually start to go through that, and it's about opening the doors, healing, going through and seeing everything, starting to awaken everything. And then once we track back to first Eve and we find our origins, then from there we basically quantum leap way into the future and go through each dimension and how the DNA weaves all the way through into the 9th dimension. And so it's this beautiful sort of retracing of our steps, and then this sort of Aquarian acceleration through our multifaceted self. And so we can go back to our origin. We can feel that oneness, that wholeness, following all the fractal lines back to the first oneness. And then from that oneness, we can then sort of project and fractalize out again into the 9th dimension, but feeling that sense of oneness, going through lots of doors, lots of facets. So it's kind of like a beautiful sort of breath in, as we retrace our steps, and then breath out again as we get to go and play in the multiverse. And so, that's very much how the geometry of higher dimensions works. It sort of morphs and becomes smaller and larger and weaves in itself. And it's this amazing sort of movement. And of course, we've only got kind of an idea of what that would look like from a 3D perspective. But when you go into meditation or, kind of any sort of higher connectional state, you start to perceive this sort of pulsing, this vibration, this wave, this frequency band. And so everything's moving, everything is alive. And that's very much how that 9th dimension's nothing sort of stationary, or, we're so used to seeing A to B, that linear perception, but when things fold inside out and twist and wind and merge and dissolve and and blast out into millions of shards, like that's really what the sort of higher dimensions are. And so to be able to bridge the gap that's why we trace back to first Eve, to sort of do that work, to purify, to cleanse, to enable the capacity to do the grounding work. It's almost like having an earth crystal that you sort of activate and clear, so that then you've got a bigger bandwidth, so that when you move through the higher dimensions, you can integrate that in the moment, because everything happens quite a quick sort of quantum speed in those higher dimensions. And so if you've not done that prior work, it's just going to be it's going to be a mess. You're not going to be able to understand what you're seeing, perceiving, feeling. It's going to be too much. So that's why there's this sort of 40 days, 40 nights through the wilderness, that beautiful sort of story of where there are going to be tears, there is going to be laughter. It's going to be, your maternal line it's a deep process. And then the final 12 weeks is like where we reach the promised land, right? Of going into our hyperdimensional selves. And so I love this idea of, sort of going backwards to go forwards. And that's very much this theme as we were speaking about the precession and procession moving at the same time.
And part of what's so profound about that, Rob, and it's something I talk a lot about in my videos, is that we do need to do that healing work. We do need to do that clearing in order to do that level of spiritual expansion. Otherwise, it does overload our systems, or we can fragment because we're not able to move into that multidimensionality in an integrated way. So I think it's profound how you're doing this journey. And then it supports the way in which we can move into our wholeness and move into that expansion from a grounded place and in an integrated way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I wanted to share with you this presentation about the precession and procession, and what I found actually in the genetic code, because this unravels an age-old story of Adam and Eve. And of course, the sort of the basis of the Star Codons is to track the maternal line back to first Eve. That was the main point of this, and then it became about, then you can accelerate into the multidimensional understanding. So I'll share the presentation on this, because I know that you do so much work with the processional cycles, and I'm sharing this for the first time with you and your audience, because I know how much work you do and with the precession cycles, and I just wanted you to see this. So this is essentially it. And so this face in the middle, this is like my artistic depiction of how first Eve came to me. And it was very sort of avatar looking energy. And so I called this the Star Codons, and the subtitle being the genetic answers of our universe. And it's almost as if essentially that everything that we want to know is held within our own body. All the answers to the universe, to ourselves, it's all within our DNA. It's all encoded already. And so by having this structure, this understanding and these pathways, you know, it's like the 72,000 nadis that the ancient Vedic systems speak of, these energy channels. Once we can sort of alight them and we know these connections, that's when we can start to tap into the different aspects of ourselves, our different auric bodies, our different ways in which we can work and know ourselves as sort of star beings. You know, essentially the DNA is made from stardust. We know this. And so it's sort of like a beautiful thing that we can, all the answers are there. We just need to know the pathways to do it. So I'll just share with you briefly on this before we get into the process and precession, that the whole thing, I managed to bring it into sort of bite-sized chunks because the whole genetic code is so vast. And so actually then manifested into these 5 main groupings. And it's interesting that the DNA can be grouped into hypercubes. So our geometry and our genetics actually weave so perfectly. The mathematics of it is so wonderful that we can actually start to bring it into bite-sized chunks to go through each and every one. And so, of course, it worked out perfectly that there would be 5, like the 5 elements, like the 5 facets. And that's why I say that 4 of these is like the 40 days and 40 nights. And then the last one is that promised land. And that's what the one that I called Omnia, which means all. It's just like the entirety. It's sort of like however far you can go in your being into whatever dimension, that's the key. That's the master doorway that says, like, here's the green light, and see what you can find. So, okay. So here we can see the actual wheel. So this is the connection of the astrology and then the I Ching gates of the 72 gates that are wrapped around the outside. So you can see it sort of fairly clearly in how it's sectioned. And I also put in here Sophiuku, which is Orpheochus, and then Orion, because I saw that there was this natural sort of split between Aquarius and Leo that is in the I Ching code at those points. And of course, that's also the Imbolc celebration and the Lunasa celebration. So it's really interesting that I found this natural break within the I Ching code that also matches the solar festivals. And it just so happens to be on that sort of Leo that, the Sphinx in Egypt, which is then propelling us into the age of Aquarius. So yeah, really, really beautiful how you can see now all 14 constellations can be merged like this.
Beautiful.
So, so the arrows here that I've put, so in this wheel, like sort of a natal chart, essentially when we look at it on the pink line that is going counterclockwise, that's actually the way in which the year moves. So that's actually the normal order of the zodiac. And then the one that's actually the blue line that's actually going clockwise, that would be the precession. So where it's going backwards. So just so that people can see this. Now, what's really interesting in the star codons, I found the star codon of Eve. And then what was really amazing was that these star codons are paired or grouped. And that I found that 61, which is the pink one, is the star codon of Eve. And she's actually paired with gate 41, which I then knew to be the star codon of Adam. And so when you look at this straight away, well, all of a sudden you can see that Eve is in Capricorn and Adam is in Aquarius. So we can see it right in this. And in between is this number 60. And 60 is exactly where Pluto is right now and is going to be shifting next week from Capricorn to Aquarius. So the timing of this discovery is unbelievable when I was bringing this in. So this sense that essentially Eve is actually first in the wheel if we go around in the normal way, and then there's Adam, which brought me to this point of understanding, well, that ancient story of Adam and Eve, and that it seems weird that Eve was pulled from Adam's rib. That never sort of seemed to rest with people in this understanding, and now I've managed to find the answer to that question, that age-old question of Adam and Eve. I found it in the genetic code linking with the astrology.
So it's amazing too, Rob, that you're also saying that as Pluto is in this transition between Capricorn and moving into Aquarius, it's supporting that understanding that you and I talk about a lot, that we're reweaving the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. We're reintegrating Eve and Adam into their unity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I knew I had to share it with you and your audience first, Heather, because I was like, this is so great after everything we've been speaking about. So you can see here that the precession moving backwards is the blue line, and then the procession is moving in the counterclockwise position. So when you look at this is how you can start to see this truth of this story on a genetic level. So in the precession here, we would see that Eve comes from Adam. So that's the original story, right? So the Eve is actually coming from Adam, because in the way that what it's actually trying to say in that story, it's trying to allude us to the fact that there's a cosmology. That story, it's done in that reverse order because it's trying to show us about the precession of the equinox. Well, if that is the first story in the sacred text, it's already alluding to astrology. They already knew this understanding of the greater cycle, and that would make sense when we're speaking about the creation story, right? The creation of humanity, or the creation of all things, that it's saying that there is actually a grander scale to this that doesn't work in the conventional way in which you would know. And so then, of course, in connection to that, when we move through the signs in the correct way, Adam would actually come from Eve. So now we've got this perfect balance of, well, the procession, of course, that is how humanity is birthed, is that Adam, or the child, comes from woman, right, from Eve. So that's that cycle of the procession going normally through our every year zodiac. But in that story, in order for Eve to come from Adam, that is the precession. And there it is in the genetic code showing us this exact understanding. And so that's why Adam's, or that story of Eve coming from Adam, is the cosmology, and where Adam comes from Eve is humanity.
Mm.
And so now we've got this beautiful balance of understanding right there in the genetic code. And so they code these gates, all 72 gates, they code for different amino acids, and they have different parts to play in the story, in how our genes operate. And so we've known that gate 41 is what's known as a start codon in the DNA. So gate 41, Adam, that was the known start codon, so how everything starts in our genome. Now, what was really unknown up until the Star Codons work that I've done is that in the maternal DNA, there is another start codon. And that start codon is 61, Eve. So now we've got the complete, both sides of the story, whereas before we had just one side of the story where it's about gate 41. But now through the maternal DNA, I can see where Eve was hiding all this time. And so
And does that
now,
fit up with what you talk about with the four interweaving strands of the DNA?
yeah, exactly. So you have two strands of the nuclear DNA, and then you have two strands of the maternal DNA. And so there is actually on the four strands, there is actually now a four-strand DNA within the nuclear also. So, you know, we're really starting to increase and at the moment through the Star Codons, I've pretty much mapped out the hypothesis of where 16 to 18 strands are within the DNA. So I've already mapped out that. So it's just a case of time before these things are proven, and science is getting there pretty rapidly at the moment. So how beautiful is this, that this Adam and Eve story, it's all about where you're looking and how you're looking at the motion of creation, because, you know, to the cosmos, everything is going in that sort of precessional order, right? It's going in that reverse order, but yet to the human, it's going in the procession. And so it's showing you that the sort of divinity or cosmology and humanity are both ends of the poles, and it just depends on where you're looking from. And obviously if that story is shared in the reverse order, where the feminine is coming from the masculine, then it's symbolically saying that it's about the precession. So this gets even deeper, the rabbit hole, because right there at gate 41, the deacon that rules that part is Piscis Austrinus, known as the southern fish. Well, this is a southern constellation. So isn't that interesting that this movement into Aquarius, well, it has a southern constellation in here. And so it's alluding to this idea of pole shifting, that it's important about this southern constellation. And it's known as Fomalhaut, and it was a royal star in the Persian pantheon. And sort of it was this star of sort of promise and abundance. It's a really good luck star, really well known. And so the southern fish is essentially the fish that drinks the water from Aquarius, pouring its wisdom into the mouth. And so that's why there's this sort of diamond there, because, you know, that wisdom it's invaluable.
It's the
And so,
center of wisdom in a lot of ancient mythology as well.
yes,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So it's that Pisces then drinking from the wisdom from the water bearer, which in this depiction, I've actually put it as Aquarius being feminine, because, you know, women back then, when these stories were told, they would have been the ones that would have got the water and poured the water. And of course, being, you know, water bearers is also the symbology of the chalice, of the grail, of being the grail priestesses. And of course you'd have grail kings as well. So that's the Adam connection. It's in that Fomalhaut royal star. And now this was what I thought was amazing to me, that
Wow.
Eve is Delphinus, the dolphin. So when I trace back through the maternal DNA all the way back to first Eve, her star law story is the dolphin. So the dolphin frequencies. And of course, both of these are about water. So you start to see the patterns that through the genome, through the star law, through the astrology, it's starting to gift us all of these understandings of how things came into creation, how these things start within our genetic code. And so to bridge the sort of biblical text and the mythology into the genetic code, it's really amazing how it all seems to weave in. And so within Adam, the water bearer, of course, one of the esoteric wisdoms is that Adam Kadmon is known as the cosmic man. So in Aquarius, we now see this connection about, it's not just about humanity, it's about the cosmic humanity. It's about multidimensional humanity. And that's why I say this story of why Eve is coming from Adam is showing us it's about cosmology. So Adam is more this understanding of, if we move in that direction, it's about that we are part of a greater whole. And then from Eve, it's this understanding of the maternal DNA of that we start humanity, and then your mother line, it passes through generations to generations up until this point. So it perfectly matches this idea of, you know, the past and the future, the continuation of humanity, going back to the origins of humanity, quantum leaping into the multidimensional self in the Aquarian age. It's just a picture perfect connection in my eyes of the two start codons that are the masculine and the feminine, that start all of the DNA code that create all things, that are the building blocks of all creation. So yeah, this was the the epic discovery that I found through this transmission. And yeah, so I'm not sure how do you feel about that, Heather?
This is just extraordinary, Rob. And let me ask you this. What do you make of the fact that the traditional planetary ruler of both Aquarius and Capricorn are Saturn? How do you see that coming into play?
Yeah, it's been really fun with that because in the transmission of Eve so each codon has its own transmission. And so what I love about Eve is that she's very different to how many people may perceive it to be, because it's almost like she is, how can I say, she is like conjunct the architectural perfection of Saturn. So she's like the anomaly. She's the one that breaks the balance in order to create balance. And I know that may seem sort of paradoxical because it is, but it's almost like when everything's sort of too perfect, it doesn't evolve. It's because of the nuances, because of the mutations in the genome, because of how Mother Nature is wild, and you know, where there's concrete, she'll bust through and create, you know, plants or break through concrete, you know, to create the continuation of the human race. So it's this idea that Eve is there to upset the balance from Saturn. But I love what you say about that Saturn also connecting to Aquarius. Yeah, I think, you know, I think this is where this prophecy of, you know, Uranus and Saturn, this sort of 1,000 years of peace, you know, that they take turns in Aquarius.
Yes, but what also is intriguing to me, Rob, is, you know, in terms of my own view of Saturn, isn't it interesting that Saturn is that planet at the threshold between invisible and visible reality? It's in the ancient Sumerian myth of Inanna, it's Enki, the god of the sweet waters, who knows how to move between the worlds. That Saturn is, in fact, less dense than water. So, again, it's coming back to this theme that you're talking about now with both Adam and Eve, Aquarius and Capricorn having these associations with waters, you
Yeah.
know, the cosmic waters that are bringing this life and wisdom to the earth, the amniotic fluids that end up giving birth to life. And Saturn is somehow the guardian of that threshold of this marriage of Adam and Eve and what is birthed from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in part of this is what I love is that, Saturn's obviously connected to the cube, right? So the idea of the cube of Earth, of matter. And then what's really interesting is this understanding, again, going back to, say, a biblical narrative of, well, when you look at the cross or the crucifixion, all that is if you take that cube and unpack it and lay it flat, you end up with a cross. And so the idea is that once you open the box of Saturn, you then resurrect into your Christ nature. And so there's this idea that we're sort of born into a construct of, that architectural perfection, of limitations, of struggles. But your idea is to open the box and then you find yourself. And so there's this liberation aspect to it. And that's why you end up with the sort of the adversary of Christ, and sort of like why there's the sort of like duality or the poles of each other. And it's sort of this idea that once you break through the perceived limitations, then that's when you merge with your higher self, your true nature. And one thing I'll just share about with the dolphin is, of course, this idea of that through the genetics and the dolphin, when I discovered that it was connected to the dolphins, and where the genetics lead me back to first Eve, which is Africa, then I managed to find where New Lemuria will be. So not the old Lemuria, but where the actual geolocation of New Lemuria will actually be. And I just think it's beautiful how it's sort of that dolphin thread that basically gave me that wisdom to say, this is where New Lemuria is going to happen. And so, yeah, in the course, I go into the exact place where it is, and it's just so rich in its history. But yeah, it's going to take quite a while on the Earth to fully merge, to fully form, but it is actually happening on the Earth as we speak. It's actually being created by Mother Earth as we speak. And when you see it and when you can go into it, it's like, wow, we are on the beginning of a whole new continent being birthed, a whole new space, that a whole new landmass is being created as we speak. It's connected to Africa, and that's why where Africa and Madagascar are, because Madagascar was connected to ancient Lemuria. And so right there on the cusp of that point, literally there's going to be or there is being formed right now a new landmass. And as I said, it's going to take potentially hundreds of years to be fully its own sovereign piece, but it's happening. And so we are at the cusp of that great transmutation by Mother Earth.
So we have the appearance of the new Lemuria in process and the transmutation of who we are into these new humans. And part of it, I think, is so profound, Rob, in what you talk about. And the wording of the star codon for Eve is just so profound. But some of what's meaningful in that is that when we trace back that matrilineal DNA to first Eve, we remember that we're all part of that oneness. We're all expressions of that great mother from the past. And your whole understanding of Eve is so different from the biblical version, which really puts Eve in this role of bringing sin and mortality into our humanity and our progression on the planet. You really see her as that wild energy of nature, of Eden itself, that she is that birthing into form, into life that has led to our human existence and our evolution on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I find, that when you move into this just purely, with the joy of the excitement of discovering, what's in the genetic code, like what does that have to say to you? What is happening in the sky, without any preconceived ideas, just that beauty of discovering and exploration. You can see the sort of the very organic, natural understanding of this. And that's why when you feel into it, you can feel that she's there to sort of, she is like a wild, defiant one. She's defiant not because she's trying to create chaos that is not from love. It's that is how things evolve. And like you said, seeing it with the purity of that. Of course, if we view it through, you know, certain lens, it'd be like, oh, well, that's a defiancy, therefore it's something that is bad, it's something like a sin, you know. But it's like, well, no, that mother nature, she can't be tamed. You can't you can't keep a hold of the evolution. Like, that is beyond our capabilities. You know, that is the divine plan. You know, no amount of will that we try and apply over Mother Earth. You know, I mean, there's organisms now that are eating plastic, where we thought that we would never be able to degrade plastic. So it's, yeah, Mother Nature will find a way. And I feel like I say that Eve is the vine. She's the first child of Gaia. So she's sort of like the animation force. She's the one that, you know, like the ayahuasca plant, you know, it's like she's the mother vine that weaves through everything, that is in everything, that animates everything. And so that's why I say in the story, well, how can Eve be tempted, you know, by a serpent in the garden when she's the tree, she's the apple, she's the serpent, and she's Eden itself, as you say. It's like, you know, when we start to see it through that lens, it makes it really special. And you can see that everything is this divine plan, how it's meant to happen. So yeah, that was so great with Eve. And then when you see that in the genetic code, her and Adam are actually connected and coupled, then that alluded to Adam being the waterman, the water bearer in Aquarius. So this cosmic man that was prophesized in sort of the biblical texts of to, you know, in what Jesus, Yeshua, that text prophesies about, go to the upper room, you know, and the water bearer, and all of these prophecies that are in there. Well, now I see that who is right there as the water bearer. It's Adam Casmon, the cosmic man. So now it's starting to pull all these pieces of prophecy, and I really feel like we really are now in this Aquarian flow. Like, I have no doubt about it that we have stepped over a threshold from the Piscean age. Maybe it's a blending or a merging, or the river has started to merge into the ocean somewhere of the Aquarian age. But I feel like there's no barrier anymore. We're just seamlessly slipping into that Aquarian age, and so that information from the future is coming forward, coming into our lives now.
Well, and what's so extraordinary in what you're describing is we are getting this infusion now of solar energies, cosmic energies that are transmuting our DNA, that are activating our pineal glands, expanding our spiritual awareness. We're in this movement into the Aquarian age that is guiding us in remembering who we are and moving into this multi-dimensional nature. But I think part of what you're describing too is, as we're in that process, we are, as I talked with Bibhu Dev Misra about, we're coming out of the Kali Yuga from that Yuga cycle perspective. We're coming out of this time of separation and of forgetting our interconnectedness, that we're all fractal expressions of the oneness of all that is. So we're seeing some of the shadow aspects of that chaos and that sense of disconnection and fragmentation. But we're rapidly being guided by these waters of the water bear back into that remembrance that we're a part of this oneness of all that is. And then we can reclaim our wholeness and reclaim our interconnectedness with the cosmos.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting to me that, you know, in the 36 deacons that I outline in the Lost Octave, in the cosmology, most of those deacons, the 36 deacons, they're mainly in the northern hemisphere. But there's a few that are in the southern hemisphere. So like Piscus Austrinus, and like the crucifixion, the cross, right? So crux, So it's really interesting that why those two come from the southern hemisphere to be included into that original 36 deacons. So there's that, and when I every time I look, they're important moments. They really are auspicious points in our astrological wheel. So that's what gave me a pointing into, I wonder if I can find something. I felt that there was some secrets and some gifts in the southern hemisphere, and it's been a long something I wanted to do is to dive into more of that and to understand more of that. So I followed the thread, went down that road, and I was like, well, if there's 36 deacons, let's say in the northern hemisphere, well, perhaps I could map out a mirror image of that in the southern hemisphere. And so, as I shared with you, Heather, that only recently have I actually managed to map out the other 36 deacons in the southern hemisphere. So,
I love this, Rob, because as you and I have been talking about, we're trying to form a group to be integrating the wisdom of the stars and the star lore of the southern hemisphere with the northern hemisphere. And it feels to me like that's another facet of our coming back into balance, coming back into wholeness. So this is very exciting.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why I feel this, this understanding of like the pole shift that I spoke of, that, the Earth's going to go through this pole shift. And so to again, to know the other side of the story, same thing with the maternal DNA. When we know the other side, perhaps there's some keys that illuminate things that we never saw before. And so when I went into the southern hemisphere, of course, there's some really interesting stars in there. And we spoke a little bit how there was a lot of artistic license, I would say, by the people that discovered the southern stars, because they're named after sort of objects and things that they used. So it's hard to decipher sort of what the original names of these things are and what kind of then got rewritten to suit their.
Because it was a European overlay in the 1600s. So it's kind of, as you've said to me in conversation, it's covering over some of the deeper wisdom that's there with those stars.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why I feel that there's lots of secrets in there, because why are these things sort of customized or covered over to suit different ways? And as I followed this trail, and of course the theme is Eve, as I followed this trail and through looking through lots of ancient star maps, and like I said, I managed to outlay the 36 southern hemisphere deacons. So now we have the 36 northern, 36 southern, which makes the golden number 72, which is exactly about the lost octave work, which I find quite miraculous. And so when I went into the southern hemisphere through different texts, I actually came across that there was a Christian project that was created, and where they started to name certain constellations after different saints. So I don't know why, I was just like, I wonder if there's any mention of Eve in here. I just was like, so it's not something that's easy to find. Believe me, it's like it's like a treasure hunt, right? It's like Da Vinci Code, going through all these layers. But sure enough, I managed to find that there was Eve, and where I found her was exactly at the South Pole.
Mm. Our origins.
Yeah. So
So many cultures saw the celestial pole as that place through which we come into incarnation. We come from source into form. How perfect.
yeah, absolutely, how perfect. So that's why I say, look, the same thing with the Adam and Eve in those gates, and that's actually very close to the winter solstice line, by the way, on that where those gates are. It's right on that sort of edge there. So and then you've got the inbulk, so it's in between those moments is sort of where the genetic code is starting. So it's really interesting to have that sort of the death of the sun at the winter solstice, and then the resurrection where the sun starts to come back up, and then Imbolc where it's like the first shoots of life, and that mirrors in the genetic code exactly. And so, like you say about the poles, that is that so perfect that Eve is sitting there right on the southern pole.
You
I
know, part of what's extraordinary about that too, Rob, is that there is no star really close to that celestial pole in the southern hemisphere. And part of what I think is incredible when we reclaim the wisdom of the sacred feminine, it's remembering the wisdom of the darkness and the fertile void. So Eve is the darkness, the fertile void at the celestial pole of the southern hemisphere. And so many ancient cultures, the Australian Aborigines, ancient Peruvians, so many of the ancient cultures in the southern hemisphere named the constellations not out of the stars, but the dark spaces between the stars. So there's some balance too with the southern hemisphere bringing us that wisdom of the dark, of the fertile void, of Eve back
Mm.
into our consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite an interesting thing because, a lot of stars sometimes when they're close together, they tend to get merged together in new artistic illustrations. And so sort of Eve is a bit of a combination of a few star sort of individual star clusters that are merged together in that depiction. But yeah, when you go into it, it's fascinating. The southern hemisphere, I know as I go into this more, there's just going to be more and more gems and revelations. And if we can really start to find out the original names of these things, then I think that's going to paint a lot of a picture because, some of them are sort of like telescope and things like that. But of course, that wouldn't have been necessarily its original name. So we've, in a way, got to look at what that star looks like, those star constellations, and start to try and track what's there. But yeah, as I say, this journey for me so far, and that's why I was so pleased to put this all into this course because it's going to be a really epic journey, of discovering all these things because it's a living transmission. Like I've only just found out these maternal DNA aspects. So it's something brand new. It's something that we didn't know before. It wasn't connected to the astrology before. So now we're going to start to see like how does it feel to move through that zodiac wheel with the understanding of the maternal DNA also, and what is she trying to show us about the natural rhythms, about where things stop and start and where things grow, and so yeah, it's just going to be an epic adventure, and so far finding these significant markers. It's as you say, like the southern pole is often seen as this dark place or this unknown, or people often think that the south pole is something you don't want to connect to, and it's like whenever I see that in a sort of a theme or a text, I'm like, well, there's obviously some treasure. It's like there's some dragon guarding some treasure there, and so that's the place that I love to go into because and so far I've managed to find some really auspicious things.
Well, another amazing thing too is that the two largest constellations in both the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere are these constellations of a serpent.
Hmm.
It's Hydra in the northern hemisphere, but then there's this serpent that's enormously long in the southern hemisphere, and that's one of the oldest known images of the great goddess. So I think there's so many other secrets and layers to be revealed in all of this.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that you're saying, Rob, that you're weaving into your course is that, I mean, you're in this program helping people begin to make all of these connections.
Mhm.
But you also talk about in my watching your introductory videos, which I encourage everybody to see. They're on your site, and I'll put that link below. You really talk about supporting people in not just knowing this, but experiencing it and
Mhm.
embodying it, because then we're really integrating it. Then we really know it at that deep level.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, with these codons, these star codons in our DNA, the wisdom of cosmic consciousness, the wisdom of the divine is within us. We don't have to look outside of ourselves, it's in us. We just have to unlock the door to open that connection and remembrance.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other things I would say that I found that just kind of so mesmerizing to me is that the actual amino acid, so how science would depict the molecule of the amino acid of serotonin, when I started to look at what the amino acids actually look like in their geometric form and their sort of pentagrams and hexagrams are part of the I Ching. So this is interesting, again, these correlations, but serotonin itself actually looks like the star constellation of Orion.
Mm.
So when you look at the genetic code and how the molecule looks, it mirrors the stars. And that's what started to make me think that the stars are like the blueprints of like our amino acids are literally the genetic code in a way is like projected onto the sort of the dome of our experience. And so yeah, it's just so great to look at the genetic code and see star constellations. Like I never expected that sort of a correspondence. And even more so than that, the place in which that falls, so the gate that connects to serotonin in that whole process is connected to Orion. So
It really, Rob, it gives a whole new understanding to as above, so below.
yeah, yeah, on an amazing scale. So that's why I say it's a real. This is such an exploration. You know, this is uncharted territory. That's why I say like we're going through that wilderness because, you know, it's just revealing itself more and more and more as we go through it. And I'm starting to reveal more and more. Like I said, the next dimension opened up to me, you know, a few weeks ago. And it was like I was sort of at that sixth dimensional space and I thought I was done. And then for a few weeks, then I was like, all of a sudden, this epiphany of the seventh. Oh, this is how it can. And then the eighth and then the ninth. So it's sort of like I feel that's what sharing this knowledge to people and to people that are watching. It's almost like inviting everybody onto this journey to say that, you know, everywhere I go, it's impossible to separate anything. Everything is reflecting everything else. It really is holographic. Whether you look in the microscope or up at the sky, it's really, you know, marrying together so beautifully. And now this sort of epic age-old story of Adam and Eve is now showing the pre and procession again so perfectly. It's I think the age of Aquarius that we're moving into, when we spoke about the field, about you said about the morphogenetic field. And so I really start to feel that the sense of ether, that neural network of collective consciousness, synapses are just connecting all over the place. And, you know, that's one of the Sabian symbols that I mentioned to you that I saw in the Dendera stone was about the field.
Do you want me to pull up that image, Rob,
Yeah.
and look at that? So you're talking about this right here.
Yeah, absolutely. So where you can see the Dendera stones really, honestly, it's fascinating because some of the symbols in there, you know, they're not the conventional symbols of what we're used to with the zodiac and deacons. So it's a fascinating way to see how the ancients would have, you know, described what they saw in the sky, and of course they personified a lot of it and, you know, moved them into animals, and a couple that you can see are still carrying on into today. But yeah, right there between Pisces, so that V shape that you can kind of see with the two fish connected, obviously is Pisces right there, and then Aquarius is actually there pouring the water. But in Aquarius there are those three deacons, and so the second deacon of Aquarius is Pegasus. And so these Sabian symbols that we're going to be seeing everywhere, we'll probably see it on different logos in companies and things like that, because that's how it works, is that you'll see things like white wings, you'll see unicorns, you'll see horses, you'll see swans. And there's this other symbol that in Pegasus is known as the square of Pegasus. And that's really the main body of Pegasus. Now, in the Dendera stone, you can see that square, that rectangle that's there, and you know, you kind of miss it, right? Because you wouldn't necessarily know what that is, but that is the square of Pegasus right there. And in the ancient terminologies, that square was known as the field, and they sort of depicted it as like a field, like a agricultural field, where this safe place for everything to grow, everything to be birthed. But what's interesting is that we can translate that now through our modern lens, that the field is meaning the field, the morphogenetic field, the akashic fields. And so that's really what it's sort of holding there, is that this symbol with Pegasus is showing that we are really are moving into collective consciousness on an amazing scale.
What's amazing too is that there on the Dendera zodiac, it's between the fish of Pisces. We're moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And that image of the two fish of Pisces, the one along the ecliptic, the one swimming up off the ecliptic, are really symbolic of how are we integrating our metaphysical reality with our physical reality. And here you have then that field image in between. I do believe that some of our movement into the Aquarian age and into this accelerated ascending consciousness is our coming back to that integration of our spiritual awareness and our sacred embodiment, instead of being locked into this third dimensional reality and thinking that we're just in this material existence. We're reclaiming that expanded multidimensional understanding that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, and that we can live in these multidimensional realities simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I just want to sort of make clear that when I say about finding out the ninth dimension, often it can still feel like we're moving through, in that sort of linear sense. But what I'm trying to share is that that ninth dimensional code is within the DNA. So that means that the ninth, so far as I've managed to discover at this point, is that the ninth dimensional geometry is your DNA, is what's in your body. So there isn't this sense of, that you're having to move through it. You may perceive that on a mental plane, that you're sort of moving into different layers, but or different auric bodies of energy, but essentially it's all here. And that's the gift, to say, once you open all these doorways, you can, see what happens, see what new things are coming forward. And that's that, you become this antenna to the greater field, and sort of everything, every bit of healing you do uploads, and it's interesting how a lot of our terminologies of, science, and how computer systems and AI and things like that, we can actually use that sort of language to understand ourselves, that we are sort of uploading into this field, that field is downloading into us. And so we are affecting the whole is affecting us. And so it's this, as I say, this interconnected synaptic web. And I think that the more people that choose to do the path of healing, and that will raise your individual frequency, the search of truth, to track your own maternal lineage, do your ancestral work, all of these things, they're all showing that they're all cascading through these fractal lines. And so, it sometimes can make us feel like we're not getting very far. We're not moving as fast as we want, or things aren't changing. But actually, if you knew that you were changing 7 generations, through your maternal line, that's where it's like, okay, well, I'm happy to rest more. I'm happy to realize that, maybe I don't tackle these things right now. I just let things be, or because I'm actually doing much deeper work that's affecting, the past and the future as well. So that's where the sort of that patience, even though we're in a quantum speed, it's having that patience. And if you're aware of these things, like going through each of these codons and understanding that you're moving through these fractals, then you're like, okay, I can just do this. And that's why I say it's a year's course, because we want that time. for people to feel into it, to actually feel the transmission. And that's what you shared before. Like I actually read the transmission before I talk about the numbers, the gates, the astrology. It's like that's sort of in a way secondary. It's more about just tune in, feel what this transmission has to say. And, you know, the maternal mother line, she's not afraid to go into the deepest, toughest, most challenging points. And that's something that I found really miraculous with my journey through it so far is, you know, things like taboo, things that people don't speak about, that people have been scared to speak about, things that, you know, everybody would feel, but nobody shares. Like, it's like she's presenting it all in a way that's saying, okay, let's have a chat about this. Let's go into this because it's right there, the elephant in the room. Sorry, the elephant in the room. Let's just get this going and see what this is, because this has maybe been affecting your life for the last 40 years and you've never known how to approach it. And so within this container, knowing that this is a code within your body, it allows us to take this approach to say, okay, it's time. And then you know that you're doing it for, you know, for the collective also, that every code that you, every synapse that you sort of connect, it's like you send it as like a gift to somebody else in the world through the internet that's waiting for that to understand how to do it, like the 100 monkey effect. And
So
all of
you're emanating it into the morphogenic field.
Yeah, and all of a sudden they have an epiphany one day because of your code that you've gone through. They have an epiphany and they're like, wow, I just did this and I healed this, or I learned this. And so that's what I think is, it's such a beautiful thing that we can have our sovereignty and our own path, our own individual expression, and we can really, you know, find out the truth of what our soul expression is. And by doing that, we actually start to, you know, upload that into the field to allow others to do the same. But yet there's a cohesion of everybody. It's like, that's why I say the divine plan of this Aquarian age, it's far more, say, brilliant, wonderful, amazing. And I know things are, you know, it's not a lofty thing. I know things are very difficult on the planet right now, and there's, you know, the polar opposite of all of that as well. But this is why this information had to come out. This is why I'm offering this sort of place to walk with people, you know, hand in hand through this stuff, because as we do this together, that's the only way that we're going to, you know, steer this ship that we're going on into a direction that, you know, is going to be conscious of the planet and for each other. So, yeah.
This is so powerful, Rob, and I will include the link to your website and to this program below. And part of what's so powerful in what you're talking about is in this journey, people will be exploring what's been hidden in the unconscious, as well as expanding their spiritual awareness. And that again leads us into wholeness. And that then, with what you're doing as a community in this program, will be emanating that healing and wholeness into the morphogenic field. And I truly believe some of the polarization that we're seeing on the planet right now is because what has been hidden in the shadows, some of the darkest aspects of humanity are up on the surface right now, as well as some of the light of what we can move into. So as you're doing this integration and healing journey and coming into wholeness in this program, that's supporting it in the collective consciousness. So this program begins November 20th. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, we did our introductory sort of series that you can watch to explain, because it's so deep, you know, there's so many facets to it. And there's so many gems, you know, in there about different embodiment practices. And that's a whole nother discussion about this ancient sort of text that goes along with it. But yeah, we start November 20th for 52 weeks, 1 year program. And it's really, I wanted to provide something where it's so fully immersive so that you would learn the entire genome, the DNA genome, in context to the I Ching, in context to the zodiac. So it's that those different platforms are all merged into one cohesive way to learn. So, a lot of people come into this program, oh, I don't know anything. I know a bit about astrology, but I don't really know anything to do with the I Ching. It's like, well, yeah, you don't have to know anything. That's the whole idea is that we take each and every one. Every week we go through different star codons, and then we contemplate that and work with that every week. And that we have, embodiment practices and activations. And one part of it is to how to activate the throat chakra, which is really linked to this. And in this program, I actually reveal the star language of Venus.
Mm,
So
beautiful.
yeah, that was a real gift for this. And so we start to use our voice and start to activate our voice, that throat chakra, that sort of that fifth dimensional sphere of the throat, because that brings it into creation, that brings it into reality, manifests it into your life. And so, again, the voice being suppressed, not being, the Adam's apple, right, is stuck in the throat. So it's this sense of how can we use sound? And of course, the Lost Octave was all about the sound. Is how do we use sound to activate the DNA within our bodies, to activate the different dimensions? And so there's these beautiful embodiment practices that go along with these sort of transmissions to go into these deep aspects that we either haven't looked at before or perhaps we didn't want to look at before. And then so that then we can have the confidence that we know all of these things, to know the I Ching, the DNA, and the astrology, and that it's all linked into the sacred language of Venus, and that we can actually take control of that and activate it through our throats. So it's really empowering. There's nothing, like with all my work, everything's transparent. There is not one thing that I don't reveal in there, the bare bones, all of the mechanics, so that you can learn it step by step. And for some people, they may just want to come and feel the transmission. They're not so much about the particulars and the bits and pieces, and that's also perfect. And there's some people that come to it from the degrees and the analytical, but we're going to find a way through these 40 days and 40 nights into that promised land. And so that's the work, to go through that, sort of find your way as a collective, to find that flow. And then, like I said, once we reach that sort of last 12 weeks, it's really like quantum leap, because when you start to see the holographic universe at play through the geometries and the genetic code, yeah, I'm excited to see. It's so Aquarian. I'm so excited to see.
I was going to say, Rob, yes, it's so beautiful that you're doing this and helping bridge that transition into the Aquarian age, into the Aquarian paradigms, into our reclaiming the full capacity of our consciousness. So thank you for doing this program. Thank you for being in this conversation and sharing this today. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in this critical time of transition, Rob.
Yeah, amazing, Heather. Yeah, thanks so much. So great to be here and share this with you. And yeah, I suppose it was quite auspicious that this actual program is starting the day after Pluto shifts from Capricorn, where Eve was, into Aquarius, where Adam was. So yeah, it's the divine timing of this, and I'm so happy to share this with everybody. And I hope that yeah, this started to get some things flowing and some ideas out there. And yeah, thank you, Heather, for having me on. So great to be here.
No, thank you, Rob. And thank you to all of you listening and for being a part of this sacred community, supporting all of us in moving into this Aquarian age. Blessings and love to all of you, and blessings and love to you, Rob.
Thank you.